Joining me from our LA studios, Mike Maloney, to tell us. He's founder of goldsilver.com, author of the book, The Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver, part of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. And he's always someone that we here at Capital Account and our viewers love to hear from. So thanks so much for being on the show this Friday.
Thank you, Lauren, and how are you doing?
Now, I actually can't hear a word that you just said, but I'm sure we're going to get that fixed, and I think you just said thank you. But now that the elections are over, it is all about the fiscal cliff. Everywhere you look, it's what happens if the U.S. goes over the fiscal cliff, and what are politicians going to do to avert the fiscal cliff, and can they come to an agreement? Let's step back. Out of this narrative that the U.S. has to avert this cliff in order to avoid recession, does it really matter long term, Mike, whether we go off the fiscal cliff or not?
No, it doesn't. It's just a little more pain now or a whole bunch more later. This fiscal cliff they're talking about, it's like it just appeared there in front of us. And the whole thing is that this trap was set back in between 2001 and 2003. When we started the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, and so we increased deficit spending. Then we did the Bush tax cuts, which borrows prosperity out of the future. You're going to cut taxes so there's less revenues, and that increases deficit spending. There's less revenues coming in. You're still doing the same levels of spending. Then we increased the levels of spending when we passed Medicare Part D. All these things together added up to what is happening today, these choices that they are left with. And one of the big problems here, it's the total size of government. The choice they will make is the choice to try and do a short-term remedy and make next year a little bit easier by not tightening up on spending and allowing the country to go into a deeper recession because of it. They're probably going to choose to do this extra deficit spending. Every time they do deficit spending, it increases the size of government. And the whole thing is government is like this cancer in a body. And government now accounts for more than 50% of the U.S. economy when you include all of the trickle-down. The janitor that works in a federal building who then goes shopping and buys groceries and so on. So it's right now they have to do more government spending and increase the size of the government to get this temporary boost. But all those government jobs are frictional jobs. They don't actually create new stuff that contributes to the economy. It all sort of takes energy out of the economy. And so at the end of the day, they're going to do this short-term remedy, but it leaves us with an even larger government compared to the size of the private sector. And it's just all bad news for the economy. But what I'm amazed at is suddenly this fiscal cliff appeared the day after Election Day.
Right, as if it hasn't always been there.
Right, it's been there for a decade now.
Right, right. So then my question to you, Mike, okay, people may not agree on the solutions in the fiscal cliff. They may not agree on not extending these tax cuts. They may not agree on these particular spending cuts that are from the sequestration. But would going off the fiscal cliff at least start to chip away at this cancer, even if we can't agree on this being the best solution to do that?
Yes, it would, but I would argue that we did step off the fiscal cliff, and we've been in free fall ever since the Bush tax cuts, and we passed Medicare Part D back in 2001 to 2003 is when all of these events that took place that created this cliff. We've really, right now, like Ron Paul said in a recent interview, we're just trying to determine really how we're going to land. We're in free fall. We stepped over the cliff. There's no way of avoiding this. No matter what they do, all a temporary solution does is put it off into the future. It's better to take the bad medicine now and suffer a bit now than to do a temporary patch that's just going to make the total problem larger in the future.
Right, and you keep referring to 2001 to 2003. These are the Bush tax cuts. It was Bush that approved Medicare Part D without paying for it or finding a way to raise the revenue to pay for it or allotting the revenue. It was Bush that got us into 2 wars without knowing how we would pay for it and paying for it with the deficit. So, I mean, the Republicans are not the party of fiscal soundness. Is there an option for fiscal soundness?
Well, there's definitely, well, yes, there was. You know, Ron Paul. He was the only candidate that actually knows something about economics. And the basic problem that we've got is we have this popularity contest every 4 years, and we elect the guy that is sort of good looking, that can do a 30-second sound bite without putting his foot in his mouth. And we send him to Washington, and we charge, you know, we do this en masse. We do it with all of the congressmen, senators, and the president, and so on. And we send them to Washington and charge them with the responsibility of running the economy by taxing us and redistributing our wealth. And they know nothing about economics and the economic consequences of what they do.
And there is this whole concept that there's a portion of people, and probably a lot of people that voted for Obama who won, that believe that you need to tax maybe the rich more, redistribute that wealth, and that that's the solution to the middle class. But what about the role of monetary policy? To what extent has this controlled booms and busts that have helped to pump and dump the middle class?
Oh, monetary policy is the basis for this big wealth transfer that's been going on for a long time now from the middle class to the banking sector, basically. But you know, when people say we need to tax the rich, they're not really thinking this through. What you need to do is just make a level playing field for everybody and allow the free markets to work. We do not have a free market society. We have a completely manipulated economy because of the currency is controlled. There's a small group of men, the FOMC committee at the Federal Reserve, that determine on a regular basis what the quantity of currency is going to be and what the cost of that currency is going to be, interest rates. And currency is 50% of every transaction. That means that the entire economy is manipulated by that small group of men. And they do not have all the information that the free market has. The free market has the information of every single transaction that goes on in a society. And these men have the arrogance and audacity to think that they know better. But when people say tax the rich, they also don't realize that that 1% employs the other 99%. They're the ones that create the jobs and so on. And there comes a point where it just isn't worth it. It's a very difficult thing to try and be an entrepreneur and to strike out on your own. You take huge levels of risk. And that risk, after a while, just isn't worth it. And by taxing too much, that 1%, you know, most of the small corporations in the U.S. are S corporations, meaning that the tax consequences of the corporation flows through to the key shareholders of that corporation, the owners. And so it looks like personal income when, in fact, it's the income of the corporation, and the entrepreneur wants his business to grow. All he wants to do is leave that money there in the company. Well, let's say we want to tax the rich. We want to tax all these people that are making too much money, and we want to take it away from them. These people own corporations, and therefore they can't hire more people next year and keep up with the growth that they would like to create for their corporation, for themselves, and for their employees. Once you take, say you take $1,000 away from a corporation, and then you run it through the system, and so you're going to hand that check over to the IRS, and all those employees at the IRS that sit there typing numbers into computers and things, they sort of put their hands on that money, and some of it sticks to their fingers, and then it gets turned over to the Treasury, and it runs through there, and some of it sticks to their fingers, and then Congress has to pass some law and redistribute what's left. By now, there's only 70% of it left, and they create some law, and they're going to do some work project or create some spending here or there. And so some of that sticks to Congress's fingers, too. Everybody has to get paid all down the line, but these are all frictional jobs. They didn't create a new product or a new service that went directly into the economy. And then they create somebody has this great idea that wasn't an idea that the free market had. When you have a free market, people vote with their wallets.
Yeah.
They determine what they want by how many dollars come chasing that new product or idea that an entrepreneur comes up with. You make the wrong choices, you get punished by the free market, you go bankrupt. You make the right choices, you get rewarded by the market, and you succeed, and hopefully you get rich, and it makes your business rich. It's
Right.
the only reason that people want to take a risk. But by the time it gets down to the actual paying somebody that's doing that government job, there's maybe 50–60% of the economic energy left in those dollars that has been, they've been taken and paid all these people that have frictional jobs. And the government might make a choice. Like during the Great Depression, we had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and one of the things they did was they built all of the trails in the national parks, which I think are great.
Yeah.
I use them.
Sure.
It's a wonderful thing that they're there. However, how did that help the Great Depression? They taxed individuals and productive businesses and sent people out into the wilderness to build trails that very few people were going to use, and it didn't put energy back into the economic system and help to get us out of the Great Depression.
I hear what you're saying. Maybe gave those, gave those people a paycheck in the short term, but it didn't contribute to a long-term fix for the depression to get us out of it. But Mike, I have to ask you to hold that thought, if I may, for just a moment. We're going to go to break, but don't worry, we'll come back and have lots more with you. He's Mike Maloney, author and founder of goldsilver.com, and still ahead, I will also respond to you, to some of our viewers in tonight's viewer feedback segment, and I'll reveal a big name guest that'll be coming on our show next week. Be sure to stay tuned. But first, your closing market numbers. Welcome back. We're talking to Mike Maloney, author and founder of goldsilver.com, about the fiscal cliff. What happens if we go off it? Why we shouldn't go off it? Why not do it? Start cutting the cancer that is so large in this country of government spending. So let's bring Mike Maloney back in, because before the break we were talking about misallocation of capital and the government's misallocation of capital if we're trusting them to redistribute wealth to get the economy going. One question I do have, so in that example you gave of sending workers to go build trails, and okay, so they have a short-term job, but this is not contributing to the long-term wealth and recovery of the economy. What do you do in this situation if you want to have the kind of solution that you're looking for in terms of allowing the free market to clear things, to then allow for recovery? What do you do in the interim about unemployment and many people that are jobless and they can't eat, they can't feed their families, they don't have money, they can't pay rent, they need jobs? What do you do about that issue, that part of it?
Well, you don't try to answer that question. You just let the economy do what it needs to do, and I think that unemployment rates would soar for quite a while, and we would have a very severe recession or even a depression. But then there is a recovery, and if you don't keep on asking the government, every time we ask the government to do something about it, we feed the cancer, and the cancer grows. The cancer is government, not just government spending, but just government in general, the size of it, how much of the economic energy it's sucking away. The free markets, unemployment will go up and down. There will be little booms and busts, but our general standard of living would probably be far higher. And, the economy would look very different. Wealth would be distributed differently. I have a feeling it would actually be more level. Right now, what we do, our entire monetary system skews things toward the financial sector. The way currency is created, for instance, enriches the banking system, the financial sector, at the expense of the middle class, basically. It transfers wealth from the entire country to the financial system. And let's talk the way our monetary system works.
Well, and let's talk about the middle class, because you talk about this demographic of people that wake up one day and go, holy shnikes, I can't say what you say. We have no savings. We have no wealth. What has created this dynamic, and who are these holy shnikey demographic people in your view?
Yeah, you played a clip earlier where somebody said this demographic, the baby boom demographic, moving into retirement. Well, there's the demographic of 46 years old to 55. That's the maximum spending demographic, it's called. This is where people are the most successful of their careers. They're getting paid the most. They're paying the most taxes into the system, and they're spending the most money into the economy because they've now got to send their kids off to college, and they're buying their kids cars, and they're living in the biggest house of their lifetime, and all of that. Then when they get into the 56 to 65-year-old category, at that point, they're empty nesters, and they're looking at, oh my God, we didn't save anything for our own retirement and we want to retire in just 10 years. So they have to pull in their horns. They are going to downsize from their big 4 or 5 bedroom house down to a little apartment, or retire, move to a golf course or something like that. They're going to try and limit their expenditures, and they're going to keep everything in the stock market or whatever. It'll drive up that financial sector, but they're not spending that into the economy. They're not going out and buying a whole bunch of retail goods anymore. And we're just going into the phase right now where some of the baby boomers are retiring. The rest of them are moving out of the maximum spending demographic into this maximum savings demographic at the same time that the oldest baby boomers are starting to go into retirement. And so it's a mix. They've known this for a long time, but nobody wanted to talk about it because the party was going on then. I mean, we had the NASDAQ boom in the late 90s, and the Clinton years were pretty good financially because of these bubbles that everybody was enjoying. And then all we did was borrow prosperity out of the future. All in the last decade, we have just been sort of goosing the economy to try and keep the party going. But the longer we stay at the party, the worse the hangover is going to be.
Well, it sounds like you're projecting a pretty big hangover, because if you're lucky enough to be a baby boomer that didn't lose everything in the stock market during one of those busts, or lose your house in the housing crash or whatever, and you have some income, some things, you're saying that you're going to be downsizing, you're going to be not spending on the economy. And if people are looking for consumer spending to spur some kind of a recovery or housing, you're saying that this big major demographic of the baby boomers are not going to do that. They're going to be doing the opposite. They're going to be trying to save.
Right. And if you look at this wave of baby boomers going from the date they're born, this big wave going through the economy, if you've got like time going one direction and economic energy, when they hit this maximum spending demographic, that is where they are pumping the most economic energy into the system. And once they pass this, so if you could make a graph of this wave of economic energy, it would sort of, from the 60s, it started to increase, and it peaked just in this last decade, and we're just here right now, and then it goes, we just don't have a much larger population. Every year from the 60s until just this last decade, we've had a greater number of people move into that maximum spending demographic than the prior year. So that has been growing up until now. And now it's stalled and it's actually shrinking a little.
The demographic aspect of this is so interesting. It's a unique take that I haven't quite heard put that way. Thanks so much, Mike Maloney, for bringing it to all of our viewers. He's author and founder of goldsilver.com.